Okay, so just a disclaimer for all of those watching, the research articles that we viewed as a group, we all collaboratively agreed that they were great resources to use for this podcast, but we encourage you guys to find other resources and tools that you can use to help educate yourselves about inclusivity in education. Welcome to our podcast of the Future Teachers of Inclusion. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Emilio. I'm a liberal studies major looking to become a future special education teacher. Here are my peers.
Hi, my name is Sam. I'm a liberal studies major, and I'm wanting to bring equity into the education system.
Hi, I'm Janae, and I'm also a liberal studies major, and I want to be an elementary school teacher.
Hi, my name is Valerie, and I'm also a liberal studies major, and I want to become a teacher.
Hi, my name is Nicole. I'm also a liberal studies major, and I want to become an elementary school teacher as well.
Yeah, as we said, we're all wanting to be future teachers, and today we're going to be talking about inclusivity in schools. That's something we just noticed, is that there's not a lot of help for special education students in the mainstream classroom, and we're just here to talk about that and why we should make that more of a thing.
We chose this topic as a group because we all felt an urgency to advocate for more inclusive practices within a majority of school communities, especially since more and more data from studies points to how beneficial and advantageous it can be for students with disabilities.
So a while back, I observed the 4th grade class, and there was one special need girl in the class. And I noticed that she wasn't really involved in activities, and she was often pulled out of class. And during recess, instead of letting her go play with the other students, her noon aide pulled her out and had her play on the side by herself. And I thought that was kind of unfair because she can go ahead and play with the other kids. Like, the other kids were willing to play with her in class, but they wouldn't allow her to.
Valerie, I really like you sharing that story because I kind of think about something that I experienced as well when I was in elementary school. We had like a very big special education class, and they would be outside during recess and nobody would really play with them. And it was like really sad because they were just like their own group. And I had one friend who actually did go and play with them. She was really close to one of the kids in the special education class. Like, she would always go and see him during her break times and give him a hug and just talk to him and spend lunch together with him, which was really sweet to see. But like, there's only like a few kids who would do that. Most of the kids just would stay away from them, which is so sad to see because they're just like anybody else.
Yeah, Janae, I totally agree with what you're saying. Having children with disabilities apart from general ed classrooms often leads to like more isolation outside of the classroom, like in playgrounds or at lunchtime. So yeah, having inclusive practices within schools really leads to better outcomes for general ed students and students with disabilities to be more comfortable all around each other.
Exactly. And we saw that in the TED Talk that we watched with Dan Habib and his son Samuel, and how close he was to his classmates and how his friends were there on a trip with him and how they stood up for him. Like, we'll see a special education students feeling better about themselves and feeling more like they belong if they have that exposure with each other and they're influencing one another.
Yeah, and even in the article we read, the peer effects in early childhood education, they mentioned that having the kids in the same classroom, like an inclusive classroom, they can learn from each other and they can benefit.
And then even we even saw in the Dan Habib video, the TED Talk, that he even said right in the beginning that feeling like you're a part of your community is pretty much the first step to feeling like you're a part of anything in your school, in your community, and pretty much anything. So it's just nice to see those kids included. And then it's crazy too, because even in the peer effects, the preschool study, we saw that 1 in 10 students are disabled. So it's nice to see that you have a lot of that inclusivity with those students, and you need it because there's so many of them and you don't even know it.
As you mentioned that in another article we read, it was called Preparing General Education for Teachers in Inclusive Setting. Um, the teacher used to have the students work individually and not collaboratively. And then once she changed her classroom into an inclusive setting, she had her students work in groups and do collaborative work, and her class improved so much, and the students just enjoyed everything so much more. Whereas when they were alone, everything was individual and the students weren't doing so well. But once she changed it to an inclusive setting, it was just so much better and an improvement.
Yeah, and I think when you're working individually, it puts a lot of pressure on you to figure everything out by yourself and to get it right. And you're like, oh no, if I do wrong, like it's all on me, I messed up. But being able to talk to other students and kind of like bounce ideas off of each other and work together if you're struggling a little bit, it's definitely so beneficial because you're not, trying to figure out everything on your own. I kind of wanted to share a quote from the TED Talk that we listened to. So at the end of his talk, Dan Habib said that you can't teach this. You have to live it. You have to experience it. You have to experience it, and you have to be there all the time, every day, around you in community and schools, alongside people of this type of diversity. So putting in inclusivity in classrooms is so important. Instead of just be kind to other people and accept other people, like you have to have students in that environment, getting to know these students and talking to them and working with them. That's the only way that people will feel more included and for things to get better, and to destigmatize disabled students, because they are so capable of so much more than a lot of people give them credit for, and they just need to have that opportunity to show their skills and show how hard they work.
All right, and then drawing on that, like Dan Habib's quote of how like you have to live it, I think that also goes for teachers as well, because we read an article that had to do with IEPs, and it discussed, well, it was about a parent that was in a meeting for the IEP, and they were discussing how the teachers are given the IEPs and they have all of that stuff listed about each disabled child. And so they stated that it's one thing to just read that, but it's another thing for the teacher to go ahead and learn those things about the child. And so I think that's really important too, because rather than just seeing it on paper, you got to interact with the child, find out about their home life, find out about their learning style, and so on. There's just so much that you can do.
Yeah, and just kind of piggyback off what you say about teachers being, more conscious of those things. I believe we need to have more training for general education teachers on special education, because there's so many classes that they don't take that special education teachers do take, and it's so helpful to know those things, especially if you're going to a school or working at a school that has inclusive classrooms, so that you can, be aware of those things if there is a student who is undiagnosed in their disability, and you can kind of catch those things and say, hey, maybe my student does need to get tested, that no one else would have thought of because they didn't take those classes, they didn't know what the signs were and what to look out for. So just something else that we should definitely have if we're going to have these inclusive classrooms that are so beneficial.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt to learn more about, for yourself. I don't think it's going to hurt you. I think it's going to benefit more than, impact you or yeah, I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, and that reminds me of another article that we read about a speech and language pathologist that had gone most of her educational experience. What was it like? She wasn't helped by teachers at all, like her whole educational experience. Her mom was a basic part of her educational experience in like getting help instead of her teachers. And so she went on to create a nonprofit organization, which is called, what was it? Let's see. I believe it was called Time and Give. And she went on to say like a few things, like some points that were really important, I think, for teachers. And I'll note off five of them that she put. So she said, learn your students' learning styles, learn as much as you can about your students, their background, and home life. From graphic organizers to tiered level worksheets, individually modify lessons for students and provide supports as needed. Preferential seating and grouping, which you noted on Janae with the flexible seating, which I think is so important. And then most importantly, give your students an opportunity to advocate for themselves. And so I think that one's really important too, because we even saw that with the Dan Habib talk, where he started discussing another child that was disabled. And when he was finally able to talk, or I think like give some sort of speech within, I think it was like a machine, however he was able to talk, he kind of gave off the impression, he said F you, which I thought was super funny. But he pretty much gave off the impression that like people were always treating him differently according to his disability, when there's a whole spectrum, like you said, Sam. And I think it's important that we're aware of that and don't always have this bias of disabled students.
If some educators, don't really know where to start to learn more about inclusive practices or special education, they can always go to their on-site special education teacher, or speech pathologists, people who are credentialed and educated in those fields, to give more helpful information for their students.
And I don't think like to touch upon that, like I don't think it, collaborative within just the students is helpful. I think teachers also have to be collaborative with each other to get help, to ask for help, get and learn and get different styles of teaching to be in their classroom. And I think that's a really good point that you bring up, Emilio. It's that you're not alone. You have resources. You can, you're able to talk with other teachers. And I think that's really beneficial for you and for your students.
I think even the teachers have to be in a team with the parents. I think that they have to be on the same page and make sure whatever is happening at home, like they're doing it in class too, because then the child sees a consistency and it can benefit them.
Yeah, absolutely, Valerie. I was just going to share a story of a personal experience, so I'm glad you really brought that up. One of the classrooms that I was observing, there was one special education student that was in the classroom, and I know not all parents can do this, but his mom would come like a couple times a week, and she would help the teacher with like reading groups. Like she would take them out, and she would like do like reading with her son. That was really like helpful, and the teacher shared with me that she really gave a lot of insight on how her son worked and like what works for him and what doesn't work. And so the teacher was then able to give different examples and different ways of just making school a little bit easier for him, so that he can like digest it more and just succeed more. So yeah, parents are definitely like a really, really good resource for teachers.
Yeah, and then there's so many resources too for teachers. Like I know we had found some like on UNICEF. There was a booklet that touched on inclusive education. Also NCBI. There's a book about disabilities on inclusive education, and even Twitter. Twitter has those, I think, what was the username? I forget.
The Collaborative for Inclusive Education, and their @ is Inclusive ED&Y. And we'll have more resources at the end, so you guys can go ahead and check those out. I think we're just going to go ahead and give a few tips and resources for how you can be inclusive in the classroom, and for parents as well, so they can take action and kind of help out teachers as well.
I continue to think, though, maybe it's not just about Samuel. Maybe it's not just about his peers. Maybe it's not even about you. Maybe it's about your son, your niece, your nephew, your grandchild. What kind of world do you want them to grow up in? When they have, let's say, a grandparent that develops Alzheimer's or has a stroke and suddenly starts moving in a very different way or talking in a different way, do you want them to think that's weird and freaky and that they are scared of that? When they have a cousin that's born with Down syndrome or autism, do you want them to feel scared and distant and uncertain how to approach that cousin? Or do you want them to know that this is a natural part of life? What kind of world do you want them to grow up in? Who do you want them to be? Who do they want to become? Advocate for inclusion. What I've come to understand is you can't teach this. You can't teach this. You have to live it. You have to experience it. You can't do a lecture on it, even though I'm trying my best. You have to experience it, and you have to be there all the time, every day, around you, in community, in schools, alongside people of this type of diversity.
All right, so after seeing that video from Dan, that little clip, I think it's important to note that inclusivity is so important to implement in our schools. And it also reminds me of a quote that I read from one of our articles. And so the woman says, as Mahatma Gandhi said, our ability to reach unity and diversity will be the beauty and the test of our civilization.
Teacher eagle, I don't know. And then at the end we can go caca like that maybe to sign off.
Phrase that. Okay. So an experience I had in kindergarten. No, wait, not in kindergarten.